Welcome to WikiPodcast, and welcome to the final deep dive in our elementary philosophy mini-series. Today, we're tackling a true intellectual titan, Aristotle.
Absolutely. For this final exploration in our sort of introductory philosophy journey, we've gathered information on Aristotle's pretty remarkable life, the sheer breadth of his interests.
That's huge.
It really is. His
Yeah.
major ideas and, the profound impact he's had across so many different fields.
Yeah, our mission today is really to unpack the contributions of this figure, often called the first teacher.
Or just the philosopher.
Right, just the philosopher. We want to give you a real sense of why his work still matters, centuries later. Without getting too bogged down in dense details, we're aiming for those genuine aha moments.
Exactly, those moments of clarity.
So let's start at the beginning, his early life.
Okay, so Aristotle was born way back in 384 BC in Stagira, northern Greece. And what's interesting, right off the bat, is his family background. His dad, Nicomachus, was actually the personal physician to King Amyntas of Macedon.
Oh, wow, so medicine was in the family.
Yeah, and it's highly likely this early connection to biology and, medical observation really shaped his later scientific interests. You can kind of see the seeds there.
That makes sense. You wonder how those early experiences influenced his, systematic way of looking at the natural world later on. We also know his parents died when he was young, right?
They did, yes. He was raised by a guardian, Proxenus of Atarneus.
And he probably spent time in the Macedonian capital. Yeah. Which would explain those connections to the royals later.
Exactly. Those early links to the monarchy become pretty important. So you have this young mind potentially exposed to, empirical observation from his father's side and the world of politics and power on the other.
A real blend of influences, even early on.
It really foreshadows the incredible range he covered later.
Okay, so that leads us to a really key period. His time at Plato's Academy in Athens.
Indeed. He heads to Athens around 17 or 18. Joins Plato's famous academy.
And stays for how long?
Almost 2 decades, until about 347 BC. He wasn't just a student either. He became a distinguished researcher, a lecturer.
Plato apparently called him the mind of the school.
High praise, absolutely, a testament to his intellect.
And during that time, he likely experienced the Eleusinian mysteries. There's that quote, to experience is to learn.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It suggests a value placed on direct engagement, maybe hinting at a subtle difference from Plato's more abstract focus on the forms. Even then...
So why did he leave after Plato died?
Well, a couple of possible reasons float around. Maybe disappointment with the Academy's new direction under Speusippus, Plato's successor.
Or maybe politics. Anti-Macedonian feelings in Athens.
That's the other possibility, yeah. It reminds us that even philosophy isn't always separate from the political currents of the time.
Right, so intellectual differences, political tensions... Maybe a mix. Where did he go next?
He had traveled to Assos in Asia Minor with the Xenocrates. They were invited by Hermias of Atarneus, a former classmate.
And that's where he really dove into biology.
Yes, in Assos, and later on the island of Lesbos with Theophrastus, who became a long-term collaborator. They did extensive research, especially botany and marine biology.
And he got married around this time, too.
He did, to Pythias, Hermias' adopted daughter. They had a daughter, also named Pythias.
So a period of intense scientific work and personal life changes.
And then comes another huge turning point, tutoring Alexander the Great.
Right. King Philip VII of Macedon asks him to tutor his son, Alexander, who was, 13?
Around 13, yeah. This was likely due to those family connections to the Macedonian court we talked about.
Where did the tutoring happen?
In a place called Mieza. The curriculum probably covered ethics, politics, literature, Homer, Euripides. The classics.
Imagine being in those classes. Maybe other young nobles were there, too. Ptolemy, Cassander.
It's quite possible, yeah. Shaping the minds that would later rule parts of Alexander's empire.
And Aristotle apparently encouraged Alexander's conquests in the East.
He did, and held some, ethnocentric views towards Persia. There's that quote about being a leader to the Greeks and a despot to the barbarians.
Yeah, that's definitely a product of its time. It raises questions about how his philosophy might have influenced Alexander's rule.
It certainly does, though the actual tutoring probably only lasted a few years. Alexander became regent around 16.
Did Aristotle give him anything?
A famous gift was an annotated copy of the Iliad. Alexander loved Homer.
Ah, okay. And there might have been some lost works written for Alexander.
Speculation suggests maybe on kingship and on behalf of the colonies, we don't have them, sadly. Would be fascinating to read.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But Aristotle eventually went back to Athens, right, for his final stint.
Yes, returned in 336 BC after Philip II was assassinated, and this time he founded his own school, the Lyceum.
The Lyceum. And he built up a library there.
A significant one, yes. Crucial for supporting his immense writing output. We're talking hundreds of works, likely on papyrus scrolls.
Amazing productivity. What was his relationship like with Alexander by then? Did they stay close?
Well, Alexander clearly respected him, but their views started to diverge as Alexander's empire grew. Things like political administration, how to treat conquered peoples, even philosophical points like the nature of bravery.
Seems natural, given their different paths. There was even some wild ancient gossip about Aristotle being involved in Alexander's death.
Yeah, that's ancient speculation, and most historians think it's very unlikely. But it shows there might have been some complex feelings or perceived tensions there.
Right, and then Alexander dies, and things get dicey for Aristotle in Athens again.
Exactly. Anti-Macedonian sentiment flared up. In 322 BC, Aristotle himself was accused of impiety.
Like Socrates.
Precisely, and he famously fled, going to his mother's family estate in Chalcis, saying, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy."
Wow. A powerful statement.
It really is. He died in Chalcis later that same year, apparently of natural causes.
And he has to be buried next to his wife.
Yes. And crucially for us, he left his writings to Theophrastus.
Securing the legacy.
Absolutely. Theophrastus took over the Lyceum, and eventually the works passed down were hidden for a time, rediscovered. It's a whole saga. But, important to note, copies of his major works were already circulating in places like Athens and Alexandria.
So the ideas were already out there spreading.
They were, which ensured their survival and incredible influence.
Okay, so that's the life. Now let's turn to the ideas themselves. The theoretical philosophy, starting with logic. He basically invented formal logic, didn't he?
He's credited with the earliest systematic study of it, yes. His work in the prior analytics was foundational for Western logic right up until the 19th century.
Kant thought he'd basically finished the job.
He did. Kant believed logic was complete with Aristotle. His key logical works were later compiled into the Organon.
The Organon, like an instrument or tool for thinking. What's in it?
It's a collection of 6 works. You have categories, looking at simple terms, on interpretation, about propositions, the analytics, both prior and posterior, dealing with syllogisms and scientific demonstration, then topics on dialectic, and on sophistical refutations about fallacies.
So syllogisms. That's the classic, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man.
Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Exactly. That structure of argument is central to his analytics, which is what we now call Aristotelian logic. He used the word logic more for dialectics, the art of reasoned debate.
Okay, so he gave us the toolkit for making sound arguments and spotting bad ones. What about metaphysics? That term itself sounds kind of Aristotelian.
The term came later, yeah. He called it first philosophy. It wasn't math or natural science. It was the study of being as being, the fundamental nature of existence, reality itself, and also the divine.
And a key idea there is substance.
Yes, ousia. He explores it deeply in his metaphysics. His big idea is hylomorphism, that every substance is a combination of matter and form.
Matter and form.
Matter is the potential, the stuff. Form is the actuality, what makes it the specific thing it is.
Potentiality and actuality. That sounds really important.
Hugely important, and it ties into his realism. Unlike Plato, who thought the real forms existed in some separate realm.
Right, the world of forms.
Aristotle said, no, the universals like dogness or treeness exist within the particular dogs and trees we see. The form is in the substance. He disagreed strongly with Plato about separate, unattached forms.
So the essence of a thing is right here in the world, not floating around somewhere else. Immanent realism.
Exactly. The universals are immanent, present within the particulars.
How does that connect to change? How things become what they are?
Well, for Aristotle, change, or coming to be, involves the underlying matter, the substrate, taking on a new form. This is where potentiality, dynamis, and actuality and telecheia are key.
Okay.
Potentiality is what something can become. An acorn has the potential to be an oak tree. Actuality is the fulfillment of that potential. It's the end state, the purpose, the telos.
The telos. That concept keeps coming up.
It's central to his thought. And he argued actuality is, in a way, prior to potentiality. The idea of the oak tree has to exist, conceptually, for the acorn to strive towards it. This whole framework helps explain how matter and form are unified in a single being.
It feels very grounded. Less abstract than Plato, maybe.
Definitely more focused on the observable world.
Yeah.
Which leads directly into his epistemology, his theory of knowledge.
Right. If the forms are in things, how do we get knowledge?
It starts with sense experience. We study the particular things around us, and through induction, seeing patterns, generalizing from examples, we move towards understanding the universal principles.
So bottom up, from observation to universals, whereas Plato is more top-down from the form.
Exactly. Aristotle puts a huge emphasis on empirical observation alongside deduction. It's a major shift.
Okay, observation is key. Let's move into his natural philosophy, which is basically his science, right? Physics, biology.
All of it, yeah. Natural philosophy was reasoning about the natural world, science in a broad sense. He divided theoretical science into physics, mathematics, and metaphysics.
So his physics, what were the basics, the elements?
He took Empedocles' 4 elements, earth, water, air, fire, and linked them to qualities. Hot, cold, wet, dry. Then he added a 5th element, ether, for the heavens, the stars, and planets.
And the 4 causes. That seems fundamental to his physics.
Absolutely fundamental. The material cause, what it's made of the wood of a table.
Mm.
The formal cause, its shape or blueprint, the design of the table. The efficient cause, what made it the carpenter. And the final cause, the telos, its purpose for eating, for working.
That final cause, the telos, feels different from how we think about physics now, which is more about mechanisms.
It is different, yeah.
Yeah.
For Aristotle, understanding the purpose was crucial to understanding the thing itself. He also looked into optics, described experiments with a camera obscura.
Really?
Yeah, noting how the sun's image stayed round regardless of the hole's shape. And he thought about chance and spontaneity in nature, not just strict necessity.
He also looked up, right, astronomy.
He did. Critiqued Democritus on the Milky Way, observed comets, like the Great Comet of 371 BC.
And geology, too.
He was one of the first to record geological observations. Noted how slowly things changed, the Nile Delta growing, islands rising before volcanoes. He got that sense of deep time.
That's remarkable. But his biology is where he really shone, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
He was the first to study biology systematically. Huge amount of writing. Spent 2 years on Lesbos just observing marine life.
Where did he get his information? Just his own eyes?
A lot from observation, yeah. But also from experts, beekeepers, fishermen, and travelers, though those reports were sometimes iffy. His botany works are lost, sadly, but Theophrastus carried that on.
What kind of details did he record about animals?
Incredible detail. Descriptions of catfish, electric rays, frogfish, cephalopods. He accurately described the hectocaudal arm of the octopus, used for reproduction, which people didn't believe until the 19th century.
No way.
Yes. Also ruminant stomachs, hound shark embryology. He saw the link between structure and function, like a heron's beak versus a duck's bill.
Did he have any concept of evolution? Survival of the fittest?
Not really. He saw mutations or hybrids as rare accidents, not drivers of change. He was critical of early ideas about survival shaping species. No common ancestry, no species change, no extinction in his view. Species had fixed natures and purposes.
So amazing observation, but within a fixed teleological framework.
Exactly. His method was systematic data gathering, finding patterns, inferring causes, not modern experiments, but closer to how, say, genomics works today. Observe, classify, infer. He even tried to find biological laws relating body size to lifespan or brood size.
And his classification system.
The scala naturae.
Right, the scale of nature or great chain of being. He classified about 500 animals in his History of Animals, arranged in grades of perceived perfection, from live-bearing mammals down to lower forms, with humans at the top.
Was it religious?
Not explicitly religious, more based on observed complexity and mode of birth, hot, wet, live birth being higher than cold, dry laying. He grouped vertebrates, animals with blood, and invertebrates, animals without blood, though he noted exceptions. Again, telos was key, final causes guide nature. Okay, from the outer world to the inner world.
Yeah.
Psychology. What was his take on the soul?
On the soul, or the anima, he proposed 3 kinds of soul. The vegetative soul for growth and nutrition, found in plants and animals. The sensitive soul for sensation and movement, in animals. And the rational soul for thought and reason, unique to humans.
And humans have all 3.
Yes. For Aristotle, the soul wasn't some ghost in the machine. It was the form of a living being. Its essential principle. He located the rational soul in the heart, interestingly, like the Egyptians, not the brain. And he distinguished sensation from thought, unlike many predecessors.
Did he argue against Plato's view of the soul?
He did. He critiqued the idea of the soul taking up space, and especially Plato's idea of reincarnation, arguing it could lead to mismatches, like a human soul ending up in an animal body it wasn't suited for. His own view of soul as form basically ruled out reincarnation.
He even wrote about dreams.
Yeah, on sleep and wakefulness. He saw sleep as resulting from overuse of senses or digestion and necessary recovery. Thinking doesn't work the same way. Senses are dulled and less disturbed.
Okay, so comprehensive look at life and mind. Let's shift to practical philosophy. Ethics, politics, how we should live.
Right. Ethics for Aristotle wasn't just theory. It was practical, aimed at becoming good and doing good. His big work here is the Nicomachean Ethics.
Named after his son, Nicomachus.
Likely, yes. He links virtue to proper function, the ergon. A good knife cuts well. What's the human function? Activity of the soul, according to reason, logos.
Okay.
And the best, most optimal activity, living virtuously, aiming for the mean between extremes, that leads to eudaimonia.
Which means, often translated that way, but it's more like flourishing, well-being, living well, and doing well. It's an active state.
How do you achieve it?
It requires good character,
Yeah.
and you get that through habit. Practice, like learning an instrument. You do virtuous things until they become second nature, a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Guided by practical wisdom, phronesis, and intellect.
And the ultimate flourishing.
For Aristotle, the highest human virtue, the peak of eudaimonia, is the contemplative life of the philosopher, using reason to its fullest. Interesting. How does this ethics connect to his politics?
Directly. In his politics, he argues the polis, the city-state, is a natural community. It's actually prior to the family or individual in importance.
The whole is prior to the part.
Exactly. Because we're rational, speaking beings, we're naturally political animals, we need the polis to fully realize our nature, to discuss justice, to live well together.
So the state isn't just about security or economics.
No, its higher aim is enabling citizens to live a virtuous life, perform noble acts. It's very different from later social contract ideas. The polis is like an organism aiming for the good life.
What kind of government did he favor?
Ideally, rule by the most virtuous and intelligent. He was wary of pure democracy rule by the potentially unvirtuous masses. He preferred a mixed constitution, blending elements of different power structures for stability.
He also touched on economics and the politics, didn't he?
Yeah.
Influential later on.
Yes, especially in the Middle Ages. He discussed property, trade, money. He actually defended private property, arguing it works better in practice. That problem stemmed from human nature, not property itself.
And money.
He had an early account of its origin arising from trade, needing a convenient medium of exchange. But he wasn't keen on retail trade just for profit, called it unnatural, and he famously disliked usury charging interest because it was money making money from itself.
Yet he understood money's function.
Remarkably well for his time, as a standard of measurement, a medium of exchange, and a store of value for the future. Pretty insightful.
Okay, beyond politics and ethics, he also analyzed rhetoric, the art of persuasion.
Systematically, yes. In his rhetoric, he identified the three main appeals: ethos, speaker's credibility; pathos, audience's emotion; and logos, logical argument.
We'll talk about those today.
Absolutely. And three genres: epideictic, praise-blame like eulogies; forensic, legal, guilt innocence; and deliberative, political, future action. Plus two kinds of proof: enthymeme, like a rhetorical syllogism, and paradigma example.
And poetics. His analysis of literature.
Right. He saw poetry, tragedy, comedy as forms of mimesis, imitation, or representation, differing in their medium, object, and manner.
Imitation.
He thought it was a natural human instinct. Art follows nature's patterns. Comedy imitates people worse than average. Tragedy imitates people slightly better.
He famously analyzed tragedy using Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus.
Yes, identifying the 6 elements: plot, character, style, thought, spectacle, lyric poetry. Plot is most important for him. Characters drive the plot.
And the goal of tragedy.
To arouse pity and fear in the audience, leading to catharsis, a purging or clarification of those emotions. He also argued tragedy was superior to epic poetry, and he loved riddles and fables.
Quite the literary critic, too. What about his views on gender? We touched on it, but it's worth noting.
Yeah, it's complex and, from a modern view, problematic. He didn't write a separate work on women, but across his writings he asserted differences. Women generally smaller, physically weaker, maybe more prone to emotion or cowardice in his view.
And linked this to male rule.
Connected women's perceived inferiority to the need for male leadership in the household and state. Feminist philosophy definitely critiques these misogynistic aspects.
But was it entirely negative?
Well, there are passages showing concern for women's happiness within their sphere, participation in household decisions, praise for tenderness, but it's firmly within the patriarchal structure of his time.
Okay, so bringing it all together,
Yeah.
his influence, it's just massive, isn't it?
Immense, hard to overstate. One of the most influential people ever. Contributed to almost every field, founded new ones, often called the first real scientist. Logic, ethics. Virtue ethics is having a big comeback now, drawing heavily on him.
What happened right after him? Theophrastus.
His successor, yeah, continued the research, especially botany. His history of plants survived, maybe less focus on formal causes than Aristotle. The Lyceum continued as the peripatetic school. Alexander the Great even took researchers on his campaigns.
Did science advance beyond him quickly?
In some areas, Hellenistic science in Alexandria saw progress, like Herophilus correcting Aristotle on where intelligence resides, the brain, not the heart. But Aristotle's teleological view remained dominant for centuries.
Until the Islamic Golden Age.
Exactly, a huge revival. His works were translated into Arabic, deeply influencing scholars like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina. They worked to harmonize his logic with theology, embraced his scientific methods.
And the Byzantines preserved the Greek texts.
Crucial role, yes. Greek Christian scribes kept the manuscripts safe. Commentators like Philoponus, who actually critiqued some of Aristotle, kept the engagement alive.
So the Islamic world knew him well.
He was the philosopher, the first teacher, Averroes, Ibn Rushd, Avicenna, Al-Farabi. Their commentaries profoundly influenced the West when Aristotle was rediscovered there.
When was he rediscovered in Europe? He was mostly lost for a while.
Largely unknown in the Latin West during the early Middle Ages, except for parts of the Organon translated by Boethius. Then, in the 12th and 13th centuries, boom, translations from Arabic, then directly from Greek.
And Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas famously integrated Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine, called him simply the philosopher. This sparked a huge revival. Aristotelianism dominated universities into the Renaissance. Dante called him master of those who know.
Jewish thinkers, too. Maimonides.
Yes, Maimonides deeply admired Aristotle, saw him as the peak of philosophy, advised studying him over predecessors.
But then the scientific revolution reacted against him. Galileo, Harvey.
To an extent, yes. They challenged specific Aristotelian theories like projectile motion or blood circulation based on new observations and experiments. It was a move towards a more mathematical, mechanistic view of nature.
Yet his influence didn't just vanish.
Not at all. Logic continued to build on his work. George Boole in the 19th century. Darwin himself called Aristotle a major figure in biology, saw precursors to evolutionary thought in his summaries of earlier thinkers like Empedocles. Said modern biologists were mere schoolboys to old Aristotle.
High praise from Darwin. How is he seen now?
Still foundational. Bertrand Russell critiqued aspects but acknowledged his huge advancements. Some modern scientists critique his methodology, but his impact on structuring thought is undeniable. His surviving works, the Corpus Aristotelicum, are still studied intensely.
And the story of how we even have those works is amazing.
It really is. He wrote on papyrus. His public, exoteric works, praised by Cicero for their style, are mostly lost. What we have are the esoteric notes, lecture materials from the Lyceum.
Passed to Theophrastus, then hidden.
Yes, to Nellius, hidden in a cellar in Sepsis for maybe a century or more, rediscovered, damaged, bought by a Pelicon, seized by the Roman general Sulla, taken to Rome, and finally edited and organized by Andronicus of Rhodes around the 1st century BC. That's the collection we know.
Incredible journey. He's also been depicted in art a lot.
Oh yeah, Raphael's School of Athens, Rembrandt's Aristotle with a bust of Homer, famous sculptures too, Roman copies of originals.
And things named after him.
Mountains in Antarctica, he actually theorized a southern landmass, a moon crater, an asteroid. His name lives on.
So wrapping this up, our final deep dive in this series. What does it all mean? I hope this has given everyone a clearer picture of just how vast Aristotle's impact was and still is. Logic, science, ethics, politics. He shaped Western thought for millennia.
Absolutely. The fact that he's still often just called the philosopher, that says so much, doesn't it? His focus on observation, on categorizing, on reasoned argument, it just continues to resonate. You see the echoes everywhere.
Yeah, just think about it. Over 2,000 years ago, he wasn't just doing abstract philosophy. He was meticulously looking at fish, at stars, at political systems, that incredible curiosity, that systematic drive. It laid the groundwork for so much.
It truly did. So as we finish, what stands out to you, listening? What aspect of Aristotle's legacy seems most surprising or most relevant today? His work is so enormous, there's always another angle, another connection to find. Maybe this has sparked some curiosity to dig a bit deeper yourself.
Thanks for listening. Write to us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.